Voiceover is everywhere, and you hear it every day. From radio.
Number one for New Country 96.3 Hawkeye in the morning.
To TV.
My name is Lady Whistledown. You do not know me, but I know you.
To movies.
My name is Optimus Prime. Autobots, roll out.
To animation.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
And so much more.
I'm loving it.
Welcome to episode 1.
Welcome to Who Did That Voice, the show where we take an in-depth look at the world of voiceover, including movies, TV, animation, and more. And now, here's your host, Trenton Larkin.
Hello out there to my Who Did That Voice family. I am so glad you guys could join me for another episode. Today we are going to be hearing clips from our special guest as the Mr. Sinister character from X-Men the Animated Series from the 1990s. This is one of my absolute favorite animated series of all times, and X-Men from the 90s and Spider-Man were some of the most inspirational shows in my life. So here are some clips of Mr. Sinister from X-Men the Animated Series. I hope you enjoy.
Collar them. I don't want to have to hurt them. Yet. It will be easier if you don't resist. And less dangerous.
Who are you? What do you want with us?
My name is Sinister. Mr. Sinister. Your whole lives, I have watched you, tracked you, studied you. You are the prototypes, the chosen ones. And from your offspring, I will control the future of all human creatures on Earth.
Whatever you want, Sinister, but leave Jean out of this.
No, Scott. Whatever happens, we're together.
I knew I was right. Your genetic material will be the foundation. The master bloodline for an unbeatable race of mutants who will be my slaves. Through you, I shall give birth to the future.
Scott, Jean, how good to see you again. Kindly go collect our guests. You escaped me once, X-Men. You will not be so fortunate again.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Who Did That Voice? Today, I am super excited to be bringing you an interview with Chris Britton. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be invited. Thank you.
Well, you are absolutely welcome. You know, it has been a while since I have podcasted, so this is actually my first interview back since my podcasting hiatus and kind of coming post-COVID now. We're going to talk about some of the amazing works you have done throughout your life, and that's going to include your animations, TV, and film. You know, just real quick, the first thing we love to do when we get a guest on the show is to get to know them. So I really want to know, who was Chris Britton, the young boy that grew into the man he is today, and how did he become an actor?
Well, I started to get into acting when I was a teenager in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I studied at night, and then I went to university into the dance and theater program and spent 4 years in that program. And then I immediately started doing regional theater, went to Stratford Festival, the Shaw Festival. The film and television industry was, quite fledgling at that point. And so every actor's goal was to be in either one of those major theaters and to do theater. And then starting around 1980, I started to also get into voiceovers and commercials, did some animation, as well as some television and film. And I started to go back and forth to New York City, did some theater in Hartford at the Hartford Stage and in New York. And then came back to Canada, toured all of Canada and Boston with a one-man show on Albert Einstein, and started to do some voices for like Sailor Moon, those kind of shows. And, and that's sort of, how it all got started. So I've been doing it since I was in my late teenage years.
And was acting something you'd always kind of gravitated towards, or did you kind of fall into it through schooling, or how did it really start?
I think I just had an interest in it, and I remember studying at night, and I don't know how I discovered that acting school, but I did. And I guess it was a price that I could afford, and would work during the day. And then I decided to go back to school, to go to university and get more formal education in theater. And, you study voice and movement, and you do work on scenes and all of that. And, some of the graduating class, most of the graduating class, there was only about maybe 8 of us. Most of us are still in the business.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Well, speaking of getting into acting, it's always been a passion of mine. I did it in high school. I did things here and there. And voiceover has always been something that fascinated me from the time I was a young boy. My dad used to mess with voices like Marvin the Martian. And, it was kind of some of those like, hey, who did that voice? And that's kind of where the show concept came from. Or like when a sequel came out and the voices were different. Well, the kid grew up and now he's too old to voice that young character, or, something else has happened, or they just recasted for whatever reason. So voiceover has always had a fascination for me, and I know my listeners, but just acting in general, which is what it all is in the realm of acting, it's pretty amazing that you get to be so many different things and so many characters, and whether it's, vocally or physically on screen, or on stage. So.
Yeah. Well, I've always had sort of a voice in this range. And so, from when I was young, people would say, oh, you should go into radio or voiceovers. And being a radio announcer wasn't of interest to me. And, so that's when animation started to interest me more. And agents sort of said, oh, you should go out for this animation audition. And so that's how it sort of began.
So I guess speaking of auditions and that kind of thing, how did the X-Men the Animated Series audition come across your pathway?
Well, from what I've gathered from talking to the other members of the cast and what I can remember, they held initial auditions in Toronto, or maybe it was at Los Angeles, and they weren't happy with sort of the... well, let me put it this way. The sort of theatrical trained or actor trained voice was what they really were looking for, but didn't know it, I think, at the very beginning. So they were bringing in voice actors or voice people, but who didn't have sort of an acting background.
Okay.
And, pretty well everyone who was in the cast of X-Men, the Animated Series, are or were actors, and they could sort of take that text, that dialogue, and heighten it just enough. Not overacting, not underacting, but they could just bring and also a reality to it, heightened with a certain reality to it. And, I think my voice quality just kind of lends itself to, in certain dialogues, to that kind of villain. And, I don't remember the actual audition, but I'm sure that was, as soon as I read the text and probably got some direction in the studio, I was able to understand what they were looking for. And so it was all recorded in Toronto at the time.
That's awesome. Well, Mr. Sinister was very sinister. And you come across as a very menacing villain. Were the comics and X-Men and those kind of things anything you were familiar with prior to voicing Mr. Sinister, or was it all brand new to you?
It was brand new to me, because, for the years preceding that, I was, reading books about acting and Shakespeare and, those kind of things. I think, maybe when I was 10, I was probably, I know I was watching cartoons and enjoying them. But
as every young man should.
Yeah. You just did. And there were some great cartoons. And so I think, everyone has in the back of their mind those cartoon voices and the type of dialogue that is written for cartoons. So, it wasn't unfamiliar. Let me put it that way.
I don't know about you. I'm sure there's been a lot of people that have talked to you over the years, about X-Men and a lot of the other things you've done. That show has been one of the pinnacles in my life as a young boy watching cartoons growing up that really made a difference in my life as to, who the X-Men were, who the villains were, who that universe was, and so that show was immensely big in my world of creating what Marvel was to me, because I wasn't a comic book reader. I was dyslexic, so reading for me was really challenging, especially as a kid. So that show really shaped my childhood, and I just want to say thank you for that with you
welcome.
And the other cast members.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I don't think we realized at the time, the impact it did have and would have. For most of us, it was just another gig. And fun and interesting, but basically it was a job and an enjoyable job, but since we've been doing over the last 2 years, well, let's remove the pandemic year and a half, but 2019, 2018, we've been doing a number of Comic-Cons, and we've discovered how important the series was to so many young people, and and those people are bringing their kids to the Comic-Cons, and
yes.
And thanks to Disney Plus, there's a whole new viewing audience.
Absolutely, I know, it's fantastic.
Yeah, so that's been great, and those favorite characters, resonate in the fathers or even the mothers' minds, and they're introducing their kids to them. Oh, you got to watch this, and they're bringing them to the Comic-Con. So that's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that show and Spider-Man the Animated Series, those both were pinnacles in my life as to what I think and know of Marvel. And, speaking of the live action movies, I hope Mr. Sinister will actually come into the franchise, as X-Men is now being brought into the MCU. So it's pretty exciting to see what has happened since you guys voiced those characters all those years ago, and to see what they've become all these years later because of the inspiration you guys had as a cast on the generation of today that's in Hollywood controlling what's happening. So.
I'm surprised, like in some of the, I haven't seen a number of these films, but I'm surprised that Mr. Sinister hasn't been revived, because, his background as a doctor and his interest in genetics and trying to find a cure for his wife's illness, and to, all that is so interesting nowadays. And his love of Charles Darwin and how he would read, the origin of the species and all that. I mean, I'm surprised that hasn't been sort of incorporated, because it's certainly of interest and current, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the things that y'all did in those shows are still relevant today with the genetic splicing and things like they did both between X-Men and mutants and Spider-Man and just all of that. And, and sometimes some of the characters did cross over in each other's universes, which that was kind of cool too, when they did that on Fox Kids. So.
Yeah.
Aside from playing Mr. Sinister on X-Men the Animated Series, you played other amazing characters. But before we go there, you acted with a phenomenal cast. There was Cal Dodd, Norm Spencer, Lenore Zann, George Buza, Catherine Disher, Allison Court, Chris Potter, and of course, Professor X, Cedric Smith, just to name a few of the most iconic characters I grew up with and voices. You guys really set the bar high for who the X-Men are, who the villains are, who that universe is. And it took each and every one of you to make that universe what it is in my mind and in the minds of probably millions, if not billions of people.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All those names that you mentioned, they are very talented, and most, if not all of them, have continued to act. And earn a living, and it was a talented bunch of people.
Well, the next thing we're going to talk about is My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, where you played Star Swirl, the Bearded. And tell us just a little bit about his character. What was he in that series?
Well, he was quite charming to play because he was kind of the wise old guy and sort of, he was a father figure in the series. And, he was only in 6 episodes.
Just a few, unfortunately.
Yeah. But he was sort of a unique character in the series and was bringing kind of a whole different perspective on the events of that series. So I only watched the episodes of that season and the episodes that I voiced. And I've been to one Comic-Con in Seattle, which, if anyone has any interest in My Little Pony, and if there's ever a My Little Pony Comic-Con in your town, it's a treat to go to them. It's quite something. It's the fan base is quite fierce and loyal, and they come from all over to go to these Comic-Cons, and the costumes, and it's a real community.
I absolutely agree. I have a lot of friends that are bronies, they absolutely love that series. I grew up with the original one, had some of the ponies on my show over the years. But it's just exciting that you got to be a part of that franchise, because it's definitely been one that's impacted a lot of people too, as well, over the years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, some of the other shows you've been on that have been some of my favorites, we're talking about more television shows than anything right now. You were on Goosebumps, Forever Night, Gabby Duran and the Unsittables, I think. And I wasn't sure if I wrote that right. I've seen a few episodes of that, but I haven't really watched it.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with that show. And the new season, I voice sort of one of the regular characters in that series. He's overtaken by this sort of demon or other person, and Jim Buck. And I've been voicing that. I think it's 2 or 3 episodes. I'm not too sure now, but yeah.
That's awesome. Well, another one that caught my eye was The Magicians, of course, but Riverdale, where you actually played Judge Britton. I thought that was cool that you actually got to use your name in that one. I know they do that from time to time. Riverdale has been one of those shows that was like, man, I loved Archie as a kid, the cartoons and stuff and the comics, but seeing that become a live action show has been really cool. And so for you to get to be a part of that, and there was one episode where you were in Stargate Atlantis as the Prenum. Stargate Atlantis, anything Stargate for me was big. So I was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Riverdale. That was, the first episode I think I did, I was just listed as judge. And then I think, I don't know, I never found out the real story, but I think it might have been the props department when they were making up the plaque that sits on top of the seat for the judge, the dais. And I think, they just decided to, make Judge Britton as the character.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
My agent said she had never come across that before, but
well, I mean, that's fantastic. So now does that mean Judge Britton exists in the Archie universe? I mean, that's right. Kind of cool. Yeah, they've just incorporated you into that whole universe. That's so cool. I didn't have a problem with it. And
hey,
that's totally fine. You can name the character after me.
Yeah, I was supposed to do another episode on March 24th. I remember the date, last year, 2020. And my wife and I had just dashed back to cross the border before they were threatening to close it on March 14th. And I was supposed to do an episode on the 24th, but, it all shut down. So that episode was scrapped. And so I wasn't able to do, I think, a 5th or 6th episode.
Oh, that's sad. Well, hopefully they'll bring his character back, bring your character back. But that's pretty cool. It's definitely been a very interesting drama. I love how they've done it and kind of made it a more modern mystery kind of thing. It's just very different from the Archie I remember growing up with, but I love where they've taken the story. Some of the other animated shows that you've gotten to be a part of, Chris, are pretty awesome. You've played Prime Minister Zarek in Silver Surfer. That was a pretty cool series. You've actually played in Iron Man, The Armored Adventures as Dr. Doom.
Yes.
You've actually played Iron Man in some video games, but we'll get there in a minute. And then you were in Death Note and Death Note Relight Visions of God as Soichiro Yagami, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that is a wonderful character. He played Light's father, the detective. Soichiro Yagami, I think, is perhaps the correct pronunciation. I'm not.
And I may have totally butchered that, so I apologize.
That's all right. No, but I really like that character, and there was some. I thought the animation was terrific, and it was all dubbed, of course, from the original Japanese.
Yeah,
and that's a whole other skill too, dubbing.
Yeah.
And
matching the lip flaps.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a terrific series, and I really liked the character, and there were some really good dramatic scenes in that series.
And it has a deep and strong fan base. Like, people are either hardcore fans of it or they're not, but the ones that are like diehard fans.
Yeah. Well, an interesting side note, the film Death Note, the director was very familiar with me doing the voice of Detective Yagami and the Father of Light, and he brought me in to meet me, and he said, I'd like you to play this character named Peltz, but he doesn't say a word. He's one of the characters that Light has in his book. Yeah, so he wants to get rid of Peltz, right? And he thought, the irony of having me, do all those episodes in the anime series, with a lot of dialogue, and then to be in the film with no dialogue, and I sort of agreed with him. I said, that's kind of interesting. I'm playing the total opposite of the voice that I that I did in the anime series, and
that's so funny.
Yeah. So I agreed. I'm up for that.
That's awesome. Well, the last thing I think I have for animated is that you actually got to play Odin in Thor: Tales of Asgard, which, I mean, anything Marvel again is just awesome, and you seem to keep touching on Marvel things throughout your career, which is super cool.
Well, as when Stan Lee passed, I kind of looked at those, and I've done 4, I think, or 5 roles created by Stan Lee, and I thought, well, that's great. He was such a brilliant guy, and I was, sort of very honored to have voiced a number of those characters.
Yeah, Stan was definitely a visionary and created a world that has it's just ever expanding in the MCU, which is awesome. Maybe you'll get to do some more Marvel characters down the line. Who knows?
Maybe. Yeah. Well, what I did, Lock and Key for Netflix. I did 1 episode in the first season, and the second season is coming out in the fall, and I've done 3 of those, and I'm doing another one coming up, I think, in July for season 3, I think. But I play a ghost. I play Chamberlain Locke, who is the great grandfather of one of the young leads. And
very cool.
That's, I watched the first season, and that's quite good, Lock and Key. It's extremely well done, well produced, a good young cast. And in season 2, I do some flying. I was up there on a harness in front of the green screen, and so that was an uncomfortable but interesting experience.
Yeah, I've heard some stories about that kind of stuff, that the harnesses and things, but it looks really cool on film, but it's not that's comfortable to film.
Yeah, and at my age, playing a ghost is about right. It's.
That's funny. Yeah. That is funny. Yeah. So the other night, Chris, I was watching a movie. You may know the name of it. It was called The Day After Tomorrow. Do you know that movie?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah, shot in Montreal.
Yeah. So you were actually in that film, which, stars Dennis Quaid, among many others. So, and your character, Vorstein, he's not in it very long, but hey, you were in the movie, right?
Yeah. No, it was... Yeah, I was living in Toronto, and they brought me to Montreal, and it was great. And I think it was the scene with Dennis Quaid in the auditorium there. And the thing I always remember was at the end of the day, Dennis Quaid came up to me, and he's such an agreeable, funny guy. He came up and shook my hand, and he said, "Great working with me."
He said, "Great working with me."
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I thought that was hilarious.
That's so funny. No, I wanted to ask if you actually got to meet him, because he's always seemed like a really down to earth kind of guy.
Yeah. It was that self-deprecating kind of, ironic humor he was pulling there. It was quite, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's a movie that when I saw you were in it again, I was like, oh my gosh, he was in The Day After Tomorrow, and I totally watched it like last week, because I was just like, man, I've got to rewatch that. It's always been one of my favorites, and it's just cool that you get to be
quite a bit.
It's very popular.
Channels. It's always playing.
But some of the video games we kind of touched on earlier, you got to play in Marvel Superheroes as Iron Man. That came out in 1995. And, as of course, a lot of times projects are recorded years before they even release. So who knows when it was recorded actually. But the next project you worked on was Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of Heroes. And again, you played Iron Man in 2000. And that one had some of your fellow X-Men cast members in it. You had Norm Spencer, Lenore Zann, Cal Dodd, George Buza, and Catherine Disher. At least those few from X-Men were in the game with you too, which is kind of cool. You've gotten to play Iron Man and Dr. Doom and Odin and Mr. Sinister. It's like, that's so cool. Yeah. I mean, you've had some of these most iconic villains and heroes, and it's like, dude, that's super epic.
right. And then you've got the sweetheart of Starswirl the Bearded.
Yes, Starswirl the Bearded. Yes. It's so cool that you've gotten to do so many amazing things that have touched people's lives in so many different aspects and avenues, and so many different fan bases, really. But for me, being an animation lover and TV and movies, I mean, I've seen or pretty much know of everything you've done, which is really cool, because sometimes people touch our lives more than we realize until we really start digging into their lives and say, wow, this person's literally been in my life my whole life, and I had no idea, So it's pretty amazing.
That's that's very interesting. And I'm grateful for that, really, the opportunity to do all those roles.
Absolutely. Well, and the thing for me, Chris, that it makes it more impactful, and for my listeners too, when I'm talking to somebody from X-Men the Animated Series, or from, The Day After Tomorrow or something, the next time they watch that or they listen to that, it always makes it more impactful to me to know, I know Mr. Sinister. I know, it just makes it that much more powerful to see those things again, because now I have a connection to you. And that's part of what we do here on the show, is to try to share who you are with the world, so that everyone can feel closer to you and the works that you've done throughout your life.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So I have two final questions for you, and we will wrap this interview up. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. The first of the two is, what advice would you give to others who are looking at joining this world of acting, and maybe more specifically the niche of voiceover itself?
When I started, I would listen to television and radio commercials and see and hear what text and reads were similar to what I could do, that were in my range. And I would, perhaps take copy from a magazine or something and practice reading it, and listen to cartoons, practice doing voices within the range, and expand my range, and things like that. And take some classes. There are so many people offering voice classes, animation classes. Take a few of those and see, what your skills are. Find out, expand your talent, and sort of make a demo, do a demo reel, and then put it aside for a month or two, then listen to it again, and maybe improve it, cut something out, do that kind of work. like as if you're a writer, you're editing. And then re-editing. That's what I would suggest. See if this is something that interests you. You won't really get a voice agent unless you do have a reel. I'm with two agencies, one in Toronto, one in Vancouver, and they both have on-camera and voice departments.
That's great.
So, and I've been with them for many years. Even with on-camera, they want to see a demo reel, especially in the past year and a half, where you can't be just dropping in on their office. You couldn't anyway, but with an appointment, they just, they weren't in the office and they're not seeing people, but they will look at a demo reel to see, what that person has done. And the same applies for a young actor, do student films, get yourself on camera. At the beginning, of course, you're not a member of a union, so that you could do non-union work.
Yeah.
But I would, of course, suggest as soon as you can be a member of the union, the better. There's lots of stuff, online about how to approach this. And, it's just a matter of doing research, being in touch with the right people.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for your advice on how to get into voice acting and some of the things, the tips and tricks people can kind of look at and try to study to be more prepared for if that's what they want to do or not,
Right.
So the last question I have for you today, Chris, is what is the legacy that you want to leave behind?
I just want people to have enjoyed, the work that I've done, and just that I have brought something, some pleasure, some enjoyment into their lives. And I remember reading some comment on YouTube from excerpts from Mr. Sinister, and some of the comments were, he used to scare me to death, and I couldn't even, that voice would scare the hell out of me. And so, I brought something, into that person's life that, sort of gave them chills. And then on the other hand, with other projects, brought them a laugh or two.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a fantastic legacy, Chris. I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure having you on the show today. Would you please just give us a special closeout as Mr. Sinister from X-Men, the animated series?
The name Sinister. Mr. Sinister.
Hey there, it's Chris Britton on Who Did That Voice.
Hey everyone, and thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Who Did That Voice. If you enjoyed today's episode, please check us out online on all social media platforms at Who Did That Voice and on YouTube at Who Did That Voice 24. Also, remember to check out our website, whodidthatvoice.org. Again, that's www.whodidthatvoice.org. Thank you to all my listeners out there. I just wanted to say, if you want to partner with Who Did That Voice, just telling your friends and family about us is the best way to share the show with others. And or leaving us a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast from. The third and final way is by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/Who Did That Voice.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time for more discoveries on Who Did That Voice.